In the heart of ancient Israel, where desert winds whispered through olive groves, and the scent of frankincense lingered in the royal courts, a child was born. But this child was not born into glory. He was born into scandal. His name was Solomon. Long before his feet touched the palace floor, or his head bore the weight of a crown, Solomon's story began with lust, deception, and death. His parents David, the revered warrior king, and Bathsheba, a woman marked by sorrow, were at the center of one of the darkest chapters in Israel's royal history. David, once the humble shepherd who sang psalms under the stars and danced before the Ark of the Covenant, had become a man of immense power. He ruled over the 12 tribes of Israel from a fortified palace in Jerusalem. His name was known in every household, from the cattle herders of Beersheba to the fishmongers along the coast of Joppa. But even the righteous can stumble. And David stumbled hard. One evening, as the orange sun dipped low behind the hills, David wandered onto the rooftop of his palace. Below him, across the stone courtyards and sun-baked terraces, he saw her, a woman, bathing, beautiful, bare. The glimmer of water ran down her dark skin, like oil on polished bronze. Her name was Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, a Hittite soldier fiercely loyal to David's own army. David should have turned away. He should have remembered the laws of the Lord. But he did not. He sent for her. What followed was a night of passion, and a consequence that would ripple across generations. Bathsheba became pregnant, and David, afraid of being exposed, tried to cover his sin by recalling Uriah from battle. He hoped the soldier would sleep with his wife and believe the child was his own. But Uriah was a man of integrity. He refused the comfort of home. While his fellow warriors still bled in the fields, cornered, David committed a darker sin. He ordered Uriah to the front lines, into the heat of battle, and instructed his commander to withdraw the troops. Uriah was left exposed, and Uriah was killed. Bathsheba became David's wife, but peace did not follow. The Lord was watching. The prophet Nathan came into the palace with a story of injustice, a rich man who stole a poor man's only lamb. David burned with anger at the tale. "That man deserves to die," he said. Nathan's reply pierced the air. "Like a spear, you are the man." David's heart shattered under the weight of conviction. The child conceived in sin would not survive. And when the infant died, Bathsheba wept, David wept, and for a moment, all the gold in the palace could not silence the sound of sorrow. But even in judgment, God sowed mercy. In time, Bathsheba gave birth again, and this time, God sent a message of approval. The boy was named Solomon, meaning peace. But he was also given another name by the prophet Nathan, Jedediah, beloved of the Lord. Solomon was born into a palace stained by guilt, but he was also born into purpose. He was not the firstborn. He was not the strongest. He was not the loudest. But he was chosen. David had many sons: Amnon, Absalom, Adonijah, each of them older, each with a claim to the throne, but each of them fell to violence, ambition, or pride. Amnon was consumed by lust and killed by his own brother. Absalom rose in rebellion and died hanging from a tree. Adonijah would soon seek the crown with arrogance in his heart. But Solomon, quiet, thoughtful, unexpected, was set apart. He was a child born in the shadows of scandal, but lifted by the light of divine favor. When David neared the end of his life, his body frail and wrapped in thick animal skin blankets, he called for Bathsheba. The palace was no longer full of song. It was quiet, haunted by the memory of a lifetime of victories and failures. Bathsheba reminded him of the promise that Solomon her son was to be king. Outside the palace walls, Adonijah was already making his move. He declared himself king, and through a lavish feast, he summoned military commanders, priests, and nobles. But he didn't invite Solomon. It was a deliberate message. The crown would not be shared. But Nathan the prophet moved swiftly. He stood with Bathsheba and brought the news to David. The old king summoned his most trusted men, Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the commander. He told them to anoint Solomon with sacred oil, place him on the royal mule, and proclaim his kingship throughout Jerusalem. And so it was. As Adonijah celebrated under lantern light, trumpets sounded from the city gates. The people of Jerusalem cried out, "Long live King Solomon!" Drums beat like thunder. Dancers spilled into the streets. The city rejoiced. Adonijah's joy turned to fear. He fled to the altar, grasping its sacred horns, begging for mercy. Solomon granted it, with a warning. If you remain loyal, not a hair on your head will fall. But if wickedness is found in you, you will die. David was nearing his final breath. He summoned Solomon once more, not as a father, but as a king, passing the torch. He said, "Be strong, show yourself a man, obey the Lord your God." But his tone darkened. There were debts that still lingered in the kingdom. Men like Joab and Shimei, men who had spilled innocent blood and defied the king. David left their judgment in Solomon's hands. And then, David, the boy who had once faced lions, the king who had danced before the ark, the poet who wrote of green pastures, closed his eyes and died. The greatest king of Israel was gone. Solomon was now king, not just in name, but in power. He did not hesitate. When Adonijah tried once more to seize the throne, this time by requesting to marry Abishag, the young woman who had cared for David in his final days, Solomon recognized the scheme. In ancient culture, to take a former king's concubine was to declare your right to rule. Solomon ordered Adonijah's execution. Joab, the seasoned warrior who had served David, was next. He had blood on his hands and betrayal in his heart. He too fled to the altar. But Solomon sent his man, Benaiah, to strike him down where he stood. Shimei was spared. On one condition, he would never leave Jerusalem. But when he broke that promise, Solomon gave the command, justice was delivered. And with that, the kingdom was secured. Solomon, once the quiet boy in the palace halls, had become a king who moved with wisdom and strength. His enemies were gone. The throne was unchallenged. But his journey was just beginning. From the ashes of scandal, God had raised up a ruler. Solomon was not a man of war, like his father. He would not fight with sword and shield. His reign would be shaped by wisdom, diplomacy, and peace. But the question remained, would the child born of grace remain faithful to the one who gave it? Because crowns are heavy, thrones are dangerous, and power, if unchecked, can bend even the wisest hearts. Solomon had the throne, but would he have the discipline to keep his soul? The answer would shape the destiny of a nation. Solomon had silenced his enemies. The throne was his. The dust of rebellion had settled, and the blood of betrayal had been spilled. Now, Israel stood at the edge of a new era. Gone were the days of tribal chaos, of civil war, and kings crowned by conflict. For the first time in generations, the kingdom was quiet. But power alone does not make a great king. Solomon knew this. He was young, barely more than a man, but already he felt the pressure of the crown. He had seen what power could do to men. He had watched his father wrestle with sin and shame. He had seen brothers consumed by ambition, uncles undone by rage. Solomon had the crown, but he wanted more than authority. He wanted to rule with understanding. He wanted to lead with wisdom. So he did something few kings had ever done. He sought God. In the high hills of Gibeon, where the tabernacle of the Lord still stood, Solomon offered sacrifices to the Most High. But not just a handful, not even a dozen. He offered 1,000 burnt offerings. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and sacred incense. The flames danced high into the night, licking the sky. It was not just ritual, it was surrender. Solomon didn't ask for more armies. He didn't ask for gold or glory. He simply gave. And that night, as the stars wheeled overhead and the fires cooled to embers, God appeared, not through a prophet, not through a priest, but in a dream. Ask for whatever you want me to give you. Imagine it. The creator of the universe, offering an open request. Anything. No limits. No conditions. Wealth, immortality, vengeance, power. The kind of power that could silence nations and make your name echo through the centuries. But Solomon's heart was different. He said, "O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a child, and I do not know how to carry out my duties. Give me a discerning heart, to govern your people, and to distinguish between right and wrong." He didn't ask for gold. He didn't ask for war. He asked for wisdom. And God was moved. "Because you have asked for this, and not for long, life or wealth for yourself, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart. There will never be anyone like you, nor will there ever be. But that wasn't all. I will also give you what you did not ask for, both riches and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings." Solomon awoke. With the weight of heaven on his shoulders, he had asked for wisdom, and God had poured it out. But wisdom is not proven in dreams. It is revealed in action. And Solomon's first test would come sooner than anyone expected. 2 women arrived at his court. Their skin was dark and weathered from life in the streets. They were not noble. They were not rich. Just 2 mothers, trembling with grief. They lived in the same house. Both had recently given birth. But one child had died in the night. And now, they both claimed the living child as their own. There were no witnesses, no evidence, no way to know the truth. Solomon listened. One woman said, "She rolled onto her baby and killed him, then took my son in the night." The other said, "No, the living child is mine. Hers is the one who died." Their voices rose. Tears flowed. The court held its breath. And then Solomon did something no one expected. He called for a sword. "Cut the living child in 2, he said, "and give half to each woman." Gasps filled the hall. But Solomon watched, not the child, not the sword, but the mothers. And one of them broke. She fell to her knees. "Please, my lord," she cried, "give her the baby. Do not kill him." But the other woman, cold and bitter, said, "Neither of us shall have him. Divide him." Solomon had his answer. "Give the baby to the woman who begged for his life. She is the true mother." The court exploded in awe. Word spread across Israel, like fire through dry grass. The young king had solved an impossible case. He had looked past the surface and seen into the soul. The people no longer whispered his name. They shouted it. From the fishing villages of the Jordan to the royal halls of Jerusalem, one truth became clear. Solomon was no ordinary king. And yet, wisdom was not all that bloomed under his reign. Knowledge, too, flourished. Solomon became a student of the world, of animals, of plants, of the stars. He studied the movement of wind, the paths of rivers, the habits of bees and lions. His writings became scripture. His voice, slow, deliberate, piercing, was set to ink and passed down for generations. He wrote Proverbs, a book of hard-earned truths and deep instruction. He composed Ecclesiastes, a reflection of the soul in its search for meaning. He penned Song of Songs, the most beautiful love poem ever written. By a man with 1,000 wives, the people were not just led, they were taught. And Solomon did not hoard his wisdom. Rulers came from distant lands to sit at his feet. Caravan after caravan wound its way into Jerusalem, bearing gifts of incense, spices, gold, and curiosity. This was not the Israel of David's battlefield years. This was a new Israel, peaceful, powerful, and rising. Solomon's court was filled with drummers and dancers, priests and architects, philosophers and scribes. His words were repeated in markets and homes. His judgments shaped how fathers led households and how kings ruled cities. His influence rippled across the region, from the Nile to the Tigris. But as his name grew, so did his temptation, because with wisdom came power, and with power came risk. The boy who had once asked for discernment was now the king who had everything: fame, wealth, armies, and access to the deepest secrets of the earth. The world admired him. His people adored him. But the question echoed in the silence of his chambers. Would he remain humble? For now, the answer seemed to be yes. The kingdom thrived under his hand. The streets of Jerusalem bustled with trade. The palaces gleamed with ivory and gold. Children recited his proverbs beside clay oil lamps. Men gathered in city gates to discuss his wisdom. Women prayed in gratitude that peace had come at last. Israel was not just surviving, it was shining. And at the center of it all stood Solomon, a king unlike any other. But even the wisest man in history would soon face a test no crown could prepare him for. Because wisdom alone is not enough. What matters most is what you do with it. For the first time in its history, Israel was not just surviving, it was thriving. No longer a land battered by enemies or fractured by internal strife. It had become a beacon of prosperity, wisdom, and peace. And at the center of it all stood Solomon, the son of David, the king who had turned wisdom into an empire. Under Solomon's rule, the dusty streets of Jerusalem became paved courts of power. The markets bustled with traders from Sheba, Egypt, and Cush. The scent of cinnamon, myrrh, and freshly crushed olives floated through the air. Camel caravans lined the roads, bearing silk, turquoise, ebony, and gold. Ships arrived at Israel's ports, carrying ivory, apes, and peacocks, treasures from lands most Israelites could barely imagine. Solomon had done what no other king before him had achieved. He made Israel the center of the world, but it wasn't by war. Not like his father. David had built a kingdom with the sword. Solomon built one with peace. He understood something few rulers ever grasp. War may win land, but peace builds legacy. While other kings measured their strength by the size of their armies, Solomon measured his by the depth of his alliances. He married princesses from across Africa, Arabia, Phoenicia, and beyond, not for romance, but for political unity. Every marriage was a handshake with a foreign power. Every union meant trade, protection, and influence. And so, through diplomacy, Israel became untouchable. With peace on every border and wealth pouring into the treasury, Solomon turned his focus to building. First, he built for God. For centuries, the Ark of the Covenant, the physical seat of Yahweh's presence, had rested in a simple tent. The tabernacle, built in the wilderness by Moses, had served the people well, but it was temporary, made of cloth and poles. Now, Israel had a permanent capital, a royal palace, and a global reputation. The time had come for God's house to match his glory. Solomon summoned the finest builders from across the ancient world. Craftsmen from Tyre and Sidon carved intricate cedar beams. Gold was imported from Ophir, so pure it gleamed like sunlight. Stones were quarried and shaped so precisely they required no mortar. Bronze pillars, palm carvings, and golden pomegranates decorated every corner. For 7 years, the people labored, and when it was done, the temple stood as a wonder of the world. Its inner walls were layered in gold, The altar was vast, sacred. 2 towering cherubim, each over 15 feet tall, stood wing to wing over the ark. Light from golden lampstands bounced off the walls like sunlight through a diamond. No building on earth had ever looked like it. Not in Africa, not in Mesopotamia, not even in Egypt. And it wasn't just beauty. It was holy. When the priests brought the ark into the most holy place, something happened that stunned the nation. A cloud, thick, radiant, and heavy, descended on the temple. The priests could not perform their duties. The people fell silent. The glory of God had filled the house. Solomon stood before the people, not in pride, but in awe. He raised his hands and prayed, not for fame, not for success, but for mercy. O Lord God of Israel, there is no God like you. Will God indeed dwell on the earth? Even the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built? And God responded, not with thunder, but with fire. Flames fell from the sky and consumed the sacrifices on the altar. The people dropped to their knees. Worship rose like smoke into the sky. The celebration lasted days. Israel was one, under one king, one temple, and one God. But Solomon didn't stop there. He expanded his palace, built aqueducts, reconstructed cities like Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer. Fortresses were built along borders. Road systems were improved. A royal court of judges and counselors was established. Scholars gathered in Jerusalem to study, write, and teach. He commissioned art. He promoted science. He elevated music and poetry. And then there was his throne, a majestic seat carved from ivory and overlaid with gold. Steps led up to it, flanked by 12 lions, 6 on each side. No other king in the world sat on such a seat. When Solomon held court, the world listened. Foreign dignitaries began to arrive, not to fight, but to learn. And then came the most famous visitor of all, the Queen of Sheba. She ruled a powerful kingdom far to the south, what many believe to be in modern-day Ethiopia or southern Arabia. Her empire was wealthy, influential, and proud. But she had heard the whispers that a king in Israel possessed wisdom that surpassed human understanding. She didn't believe it, so she came to see it for herself. Her caravan was massive: gold, spices, jewels, camels and servants, soldiers and scholars. She arrived at the gates of Jerusalem, her robes flowing like desert wind, her eyes sharp and curious. And when she met Solomon, when she heard him speak, she was undone. She tested him with riddles, posed questions that had stumped her own wisest men. But Solomon answered every single one, with ease, with clarity, with depth. She toured the palace, saw the temple, watched how his servants moved, how his court was ordered, how justice was administered. And she said, "Everything I heard in my country about your wisdom and wealth was true, but I did not believe it until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me." She blessed the God of Israel, a foreign queen, a royal woman of Africa, and she acknowledged the source of Solomon's greatness, his God. She left richer than she arrived, not just in gold, but in wisdom. Solomon had reached the peak. He was not just a king, he was the king. No empire rivaled his. No ruler equaled him. Israel, once a band of shepherd tribes, was now a global superpower. But something began to shift. Success has a subtle danger. Prosperity can make the spirit dull. Power can make the heart forget. Solomon had everything: riches, peace, the praise of nations. But beneath it all, something sacred was beginning to slip. He was building a kingdom, but was he still building his soul? For now, the empire stood tall, golden, glorious, impressive. But glory is only as strong as the heart behind it. And though the building stood tall, cracks had begun to form. If this story moved you, like, subscribe to Heavenly Tales HQ, and share it with someone who needs it. Tell us in the comments, which Bible story should we bring to life next? Let's keep spreading these powerful Bible stories together.